When you stop caring, the first thing that happens is shock and denial. It's an instant disruption in his mind, a reality he refuses to accept. He has built an internal belief that no matter what happens, you'll always be there, always care, always respond, always give him your energy. So when you pull back, when your energy shifts, when your responses become non-existent or neutral, his mind struggles to process it. It's not just about losing your attention. It's about losing control over the dynamic that he once felt secure in. At first, he convinces himself that this is nothing, that you're just upset, that it's a phase, that, like before, you'll come around. He believes you're playing a game, testing him, or trying to make a point. He assumes that if he waits it out, you'll cave in and things will go back to how they were. This is where his ego steps in to protect him. His mind reassures him that nothing has changed, that you're just being dramatic, and that you'll return to your usual behavior soon enough. But deep inside, something else is happening. There's a crack in his certainty. A small voice inside him whispers, "What if she's serious this time?" He doesn't like that question, so he pushes it away. Denial becomes his armor. He pretends that your silence, your disinterest, your emotional distance mean nothing to him. He tells himself, "She's just in her feelings. She'll text soon. She'll check up on me. She always does." He clings to the pattern that has always worked in his favor. He might act as if he doesn't notice. He'll go about his day, post on social media, talk to other people, even laugh and joke as if nothing is wrong. This is all surface level. Because no matter what distractions he throws in front of himself, your absence lingers in the back of his mind. It's like an itch he can't scratch, a thought he can't escape. The more he tries to ignore it, the louder it becomes. Then something strange happens. He starts testing the waters. He might send a simple message, something casual, something that gives him an excuse to see if you'll respond. He might comment on something you post, react to a story, or mention an inside joke just to see if you still acknowledge him. If you do, even in a small way, he breathes a sigh of relief. See, she's still there. She still cares. And just like that, he's back in control. But if you don't, if you remain distant, unread, untouched by his attempts, that's when the real shock starts setting in. Now his mind begins racing. Well, wait, why isn't she reacting? Why isn't she checking on me? Why isn't she breaking like she always does? He replays the last conversation, the last interaction, the last moment when things felt normal. He starts looking for clues, for signs, for any indication that this was coming. He wonders if he missed something, if there was a shift he didn't see happening in real time. At this point, he still tries to rationalize it. Maybe you're just busy. Maybe you're playing hard to get. Maybe you're trying to make him miss you. His ego keeps feeding him comforting lies so that he doesn't have to face the truth. You've detached, but as the silence lingers, denial becomes harder to hold on to. The patterns have changed, and he can no longer ignore it. What used to be predictable is now unpredictable. What used to be familiar is now foreign. And that's when the fear creeps in. The fear that maybe, just maybe, you're not coming back this time. That's when he starts paying attention in ways he never did before. He notices how your energy isn't there, how you're no longer reaching out, how you don't even seem to be mad. You're just gone. Emotionally unavailable, checked out. And nothing is more terrifying than indifference, because anger still means you care. Frustration still means you're invested. But indifference, that means he no longer has a place in your heart. At this stage, he may try to downplay it to himself, but deep inside, he knows something is different. He feels it. The energy has shifted. The dynamic has changed. And now he's the one sitting with the uncertainty, the discomfort, the lack of control. The game he thought he was playing, he just realized he was never the one in control. And that realization shakes him to his core. The moment he realizes that your absence is not just a temporary mood shift, but something deeper, confusion sets in. He doesn't understand what's happening because up until now he believed he knew you. He believed he understood your emotions, your reactions, your patterns, but suddenly nothing makes sense anymore. The person who once cared so deeply, the person who once worried about him, checked in and gave him endless reassurance, has now pulled back. The warmth that he always took for granted has faded, and he doesn't know why. His mind scrambles for an explanation. He replays past conversations, analyzing every detail, looking for the moment when things changed. He asks himself whether he said something wrong, whether he missed a sign, whether there was something he was supposed to do but didn't. He wonders if this is a test, if you are trying to get a reaction out of him, if this is some kind of strategy to make him chase you. His ego tells him that this can't be real, that you wouldn't just stop caring for no reason. So he begins to convince himself that you are just trying to teach him a lesson, that this is just a temporary phase. But as the days go by and nothing changes, the confusion grows stronger. The usual ways of getting your attention no longer work. He sends messages, but your responses are short and emotionless. Or worse, there's no response at all. He posts something, hoping you'll react, but you don't. He even tries bringing up something personal, something he knows would normally get a response from you, but still, nothing. Now, he doesn't just feel confused, he feels uneasy. This is where anxiety begins to creep in. His heart starts to beat faster when he sees your name, not because he feels confident, but because he doesn't know what to expect anymore. The certainty he once had about you is gone, and it makes him restless. He can't focus like he used to because in the back of his mind, there's an unanswered question. Why have you stopped caring? He doesn't ask you directly because his pride won't let him. Instead, he keeps searching for answers in silence, watching your moves, hoping for some kind of clue. He might start scrolling through old messages, looking at the way you used to respond to him, the way you used to care. He notices how different things feel now. Before, he could almost predict what you would say, how you would react, how you would show up for him. Now he has no idea what to expect from you. The dynamic has shifted completely, and it unsettles him. He checks to see if you're online, but he doesn't reach out because he's not sure how you'll respond or if you'll respond at all. And then a new fear enters his mind. What if you've moved on? The thought shakes him. It wasn't something he considered before because he always assumed you'd be there. Always assumed your attention would belong to him. But now that you've become distant, he realizes that someone else could be occupying the space he once took for granted. And that idea makes him feel something he hasn't felt before: pressure. The pressure to do something before it's too late. That pressure creates an internal battle. His pride tells him to stay calm, to act like he doesn't care, to play it cool. But his growing anxiety is screaming at him to figure out what's going on. He doesn't want to appear desperate, but he also doesn't want to lose his sense of control over the situation. This conflict creates frustration within him. He wants answers, but he doesn't want to ask for them directly. He wants to know what changed, but he doesn't want to admit that your actions are affecting him. So he starts making small attempts to regain your attention, but he does it in subtle ways. He might suddenly like an old picture, hoping you'll notice. He might reply to an old message, pretending like he just now saw it. He might even bring up something random just to test whether you'll engage with him. If you do, even in a small way, he'll feel reassured, at least for a moment. But if you don't, the anxiety will intensify. At this point, he starts feeling the effects of your emotional distance in a way he never expected. He might not admit it to anyone else, but inside, he's experiencing something he never thought he would: uncertainty. He used to be so sure of your emotions, so sure of the role he played in your life. Now that certainty is slipping away, and the more he tries to hold on to it, the more it disappears. The confusion turns into discomfort. The discomfort turns into frustration. And soon, the frustration will turn into something even deeper. The moment confusion and anxiety set in, his ego begins to fight back. His mind refuses to accept that he is losing control over the situation, so he goes into resistance mode. He doesn't want to believe that you've truly pulled away. He doesn't want to acknowledge that his influence over you has weakened. So instead of facing the reality of what's happening, he convinces himself that you're doing this to get a reaction out of him. His pride tells him that you're playing a game, and he refuses to play along. He starts acting indifferent, pretending like your silence doesn't bother him. If you're not reaching out, then neither is he. If you're pulling away, then he's going to pull away even further. In his mind, he believes that if he acts like he doesn't care, then eventually you'll break and come back. He tells himself that the best way to regain control is to act like he's completely unaffected. He forces himself to post things that make it look like he's having the time of his life. He becomes overly active on social media, engaging with other people, liking pictures, commenting on posts, making it seem like he's too busy enjoying life to even notice your absence. But deep down, this is all an act. The more he tries to convince himself that he doesn't care, the more he realizes that he actually does. The silence that he thought he could handle is now starting to feel heavier. The distance that he assumed would make you chase him is now making him question everything. His resistance is not about confidence. It's about fear. He's afraid to admit to himself that he no longer has the control he once did. He's afraid to acknowledge that something within him is shifting. He starts testing you in different ways. If ignoring you doesn't work, he might switch to provoking you. He might say something in a way that he knows will trigger a reaction from you. He might bring up old memories, subtly mention something personal, or even do something that he knows would normally upset you. He wants to see if he still has an emotional impact on you, if he still has the ability to make you react. Because if he can still make you feel something, anger, jealousy, frustration, then in his mind, he still has a hold on you. If he sees that you're still affected, even if it's a negative reaction, it gives him a false sense of security. He thinks she's still emotionally invested. She's still paying attention. And as long as he believes that, he feels like he hasn't truly lost you. But if his attempts to provoke you are met with indifference, if you remain unbothered by his games, that's when the panic starts to creep in. This is where his resistance starts to break down. He realizes that no matter what he does, you're not reacting the way he expects you to. You're not chasing, you're not engaging, you're not giving him the attention he's been relying on for so long. And this realization stings more than he ever anticipated. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought he could dictate how you felt. But now the power dynamic has shifted and he doesn't know how to handle it. His pride tells him to stay strong, to hold out longer, to wait for you to crack. But his emotions are betraying him. He finds himself thinking about you more often than he wants to. He finds himself checking your page, wondering what you're doing, questioning why you're not giving him the reaction he expected. And the more he tries to resist these thoughts, the stronger they become. At this stage, frustration begins to take over. He starts feeling restless, irritated, and even angry. But not at you. He's angry at himself for feeling this way. He doesn't want to admit that your distance is affecting him, so he looks for someone else to blame. He might start blaming you, telling himself that you're being unfair, that you're playing mind games, that you're trying to manipulate him. In reality, he's just projecting his own discomfort onto you. But no matter how much he tries to shift the blame, deep down he knows the truth. He knows that he's fighting a battle within himself. He knows that his ego is the only thing stopping him from admitting how much he actually cares. He knows that the more he resists, the more it's eating him alive. And soon that resistance will start to break. When the resistance starts to break down, frustration takes over. At first, he tried to act like he didn't care. He tried to convince himself that your distance was a game, that you were just trying to test him. But now he's starting to feel something he never expected: powerlessness. And that feeling drives him into a state of frustration that he doesn't know how to handle. His mind becomes restless. No matter what he does, he can't shake the thought of you. He tries distracting himself with other people, other conversations, other activities, but nothing fully holds his attention. Every time he checks his phone, he wonders if you've reached out. Every time he opens social media, he looks for a sign that you're thinking about him. And every time he comes up empty, the frustration builds. He starts asking himself questions he never had to ask before. Why isn't she reacting? Why isn't she chasing? Why does she seem so unbothered? It doesn't make sense to him. He was so sure that you would eventually break, that you would come back, that you would fold under the silence. But instead, you seem more at peace than ever. And that's what truly gets under his skin. The more he sees you moving forward without him, the angrier he becomes. It's not that he necessarily wants to be with you. It's that he doesn't want to feel like he's being replaced, like he's being erased from your life. His ego doesn't want to accept that he no longer has the same effect on you. He thought that if he pulled back, you would come running. But now it's becoming painfully clear that the only one who's struggling in this situation is him. So he starts reacting impulsively. He might suddenly reach out with a random message that makes no sense, just to see if you'll respond. He might bring up an old memory, hoping to spark some kind of nostalgia. Or he might try to provoke you by saying something that he knows would have triggered a reaction in the past. But if you continue to remain indifferent, his frustration turns into something deeper. Now he starts rewriting the narrative in his head. Instead of seeing himself as the one who pushed you away, he convinces himself that you're the one who changed. He tells himself that you're being unfair, that you're the one who's playing games. He starts to resent the fact that he no longer has control over your emotions. And because he doesn't want to admit that his actions led to this, he finds ways to blame you instead. His resentment might show up in different ways. He might start posting things meant to get under your skin, subtle jabs disguised as casual thoughts. He might suddenly start engaging with other people more openly, trying to make it seem like he's moved on effortlessly. But none of it is real. It's all an attempt to get a reaction from you, to prove to himself that he still holds some kind of power in your life. The problem is, no matter what he does, he can't escape the truth. Deep down, he knows that if he were truly over the situation, he wouldn't have to put in so much effort to prove it. He wouldn't be checking to see if you notice his posts. He wouldn't be waiting for you to react. He wouldn't feel this level of frustration over something that he once claimed didn't matter to him. And this is where the emotional turmoil really starts to take over. His frustration turns inward. He starts feeling annoyed with himself for even caring this much. He thought he was stronger than this. He thought he had more control over his emotions. But now it's becoming clear that the more he tries to fight his feelings, the more power they have over him. This internal struggle is exhausting. He doesn't want to admit that he cares, but he also can't ignore the fact that he does. He doesn't want to show weakness, but he also feels like he's losing control. Every time he thinks about reaching out, his pride holds him back. But every time he holds back, his frustration grows. It's a vicious cycle that he doesn't know how to break. At this stage, his thoughts start to consume him. He replays past conversations looking for clues. He wonders if there was something he missed, something he could have done differently. He questions whether you ever really cared about him in the first place. And the more he dwells on these thoughts, the deeper his frustration becomes. His emotions are all over the place. One moment he wants to prove that he doesn't need you. The next, he's tempted to reach out just to see if you'll respond. He's caught between wanting to move on and not being ready to let go. And because he refuses to acknowledge the real reason behind his emotions, he continues to lash out in ways that only make things worse. Nothing feels satisfying. No distraction is enough to take his mind off of what's happening. No attempt to make you jealous gives him the validation he's looking for. He's trapped in a cycle of frustration, resentment, and confusion, and he doesn't know how to get out. His pride won't let him admit the truth, but his emotions won't let him ignore it either. And as this battle rages on inside of him, he starts to realize that the only person suffering in this situation is him. The frustration has already taken root, but now it begins to evolve into something deeper, an unbearable feeling of regret. He starts to wonder if he made a mistake, if he miscalculated the situation, if he underestimated just how much losing you would affect him. At first, his pride wouldn't let him acknowledge any of this. He convinced himself that he was in control, that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage, but now it's no longer working. He feels the weight of your absence in ways he never expected, and that realization haunts him. His mind starts replaying every moment, every conversation, every action that led to this point. He thinks about the times he ignored your efforts, the moments when you showed up for him, when you prioritized him while he took you for granted. Those memories hit differently now because he's no longer the one dictating the flow of the relationship. You've pulled back, and suddenly everything feels uncertain to him. He starts to crave the validation that he once had, the comfort of knowing that you cared, that you were there, that no matter what he did, you wouldn't leave. But that security is gone, and with it, his sense of control. Now regret floods his thoughts. He starts thinking about all the things he could have done differently. What if I had just appreciated her more? What if I had just responded instead of ignoring her? What if I had been more present, more attentive, more invested? These questions torment him because for the first time he realizes that the damage may be irreversible. The worst part of this stage is that he knows he can't go back in time. He can't undo the choices that led to this. And that's where the fear sets in. Fear that he pushed you too far away. Fear that you've truly moved on. Fear that someone else has already stepped in to treat you the way he refused to. That thought alone is enough to drive him to desperation, to make him act in ways that even he doesn't fully understand. He might try to convince himself that he can fix this, that if he just says the right words, makes the right move, he can get back what he lost. He starts strategizing, thinking about ways to slip back into your life, ways to test if you're still emotionally connected. He might send a casual message, something meaningless on the surface but loaded with intention. He wants to see if you'll take the bait, if you'll respond the way you used to. And if you don't, that's when the regret deepens into something much worse, self-doubt. He starts questioning himself in ways he never had to before. Did she ever really care about me? Was I ever as important to her as she was to me? How did I let this happen? These thoughts eat away at him because he realizes that he no longer has the answers. He used to be so sure of his place in your life, but now that certainty has been stripped away and it leaves him feeling lost. He tries to find comfort in distractions, friends, work, entertainment, but none of it truly fills the void. No amount of scrolling through social media, no number of new interactions, no external validation can erase the fact that something significant has shifted. The connection he once had with you, the energy you once poured into him, is no longer there. And without it, he feels emptier than he ever anticipated. His emotions start swinging between extremes. One moment he's convincing himself that he still has a chance, that all he needs to do is reach out and everything will go back to the way it was. The next moment, he's drowning in the fear that it's already too late, that he's lost you for good. This uncertainty torments him because he doesn't know how to function in a reality where he's no longer the center of your attention. This is when he starts obsessing over your every move. He watches what you post, analyzes your words, searches for hidden meanings. If you seem happy without him, it cuts deep. If you seem unaffected, it makes him spiral further into his own emotions. He wonders if you ever even missed him, if you ever even cared. He struggles to accept that you've detached while he's still stuck in this emotional turmoil. And then comes the wave of desperation. When regret reaches its peak, he starts considering actions he never would have before. Maybe he suddenly calls you out of nowhere using a flimsy excuse just to hear your voice. Maybe he randomly comments on an old inside joke, hoping to trigger some familiarity. Maybe he even tries to make you jealous by flaunting new interactions, just to see if you'll react. But if you don't bite, if you continue to hold your ground, then the full weight of his regret crashes down on him. He realizes that he might have lost something real, something meaningful, something he can't easily replace. And that thought lingers in his mind, a constant reminder that his actions, his choices, his neglect have led him to a place where he no longer has access to the one thing he once thought he could always rely on. The realization that he has lost you finally sinks in. The weight of it is heavier than he ever expected. Up until now, he held on to the belief that he still had control, that at any moment he could reach out and things would return to the way they were. But as time passes, as the silence stretches longer than he thought possible, he starts to feel something he never anticipated. Helplessness. He never thought he would get to a point where you would no longer care. He never imagined a reality where his absence wouldn't affect you. Yet here he is, standing face to face with that truth, and it shakes him to his core. He feels an emptiness that he can't ignore. At first, he tried to suppress it, tried to act like he was unaffected. He kept himself busy, surrounded himself with distractions, convinced himself that he was moving on. But the longer he goes without hearing from you, the harder it is to pretend. He starts to realize that the distractions were only temporary, that no amount of noise can drown out the silence you left behind. It's not just about missing you. It's about missing the version of himself that existed when he had you in his life. Every time he looks back, he sees the moments he took for granted, the times you reached out, the way you cared, the effort you put in. Things he once dismissed as expected now feel like luxuries he no longer has access to. He starts to understand the difference between having something and appreciating it. He had you, but he never truly valued what that meant. And now, as he watches you move forward without him, he feels the full weight of that mistake. He tries to find a way to cope, but nothing really works. The casual conversations with others feel empty. The temporary distractions don't bring him peace. No matter where he goes, no matter what he does, the thought of you lingers. He wonders if you ever think about him the way he thinks about you. He wonders if you ever scroll through old messages, if you ever feel a pang of nostalgia, if there's even a small part of you that misses what you had. But deep down, he knows the answer. If you did, you would have reached out by now. And the fact that you haven't speaks volumes. His pride fights against this truth. He doesn't want to admit that he's the one who lost. He doesn't want to believe that you've truly moved on. But the evidence is undeniable. You're no longer checking in. You're no longer giving him the attention he once took for granted. You're no longer waiting for him. And that's what truly destroys him. The idea that you waited for so long, that you gave so much, that you cared so deeply, and then one day you just stopped. Not because you wanted to, but because you had no other choice. The final stage of this process is one of quiet suffering. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't show it. To the outside world, he seems fine, maybe even thriving. But inside, he feels an ache that he doesn't know how to heal. He replays old conversations, searches for closure in places where there is none. He wants to reach out, wants to say something, wants to undo what has already been done, but he knows that even if he did, it wouldn't change anything. The version of you that once fought for him, that once cared, that once stayed, no longer exists. He wonders if there's anything he could say that would make a difference. If there's any way to turn back time, to get back the version of you that once needed him. But he knows that's not how this works. You didn't walk away on a whim. You didn't stop caring overnight. You gave warning signs, second chances, opportunities for him to change, and he ignored them all. He thought he had time. He thought you would always be there. Now he's left with nothing but memories. The ones he once dismissed as unimportant now haunt him. He remembers the way you laughed, the way you looked at him, the small moments that he never paid attention to. He remembers the way you used to care, the way you always made him feel like he mattered. And now he realizes that was the real gift, not the attention, not the effort, but the feeling of being valued by someone who truly saw him. There is no comfort in this stage, no sense of relief. Just an overwhelming realization that he was the architect of his own loss. He sees now that your absence is permanent, that you are no longer waiting, that you have reclaimed your power. And he knows with painful certainty that he will never experience that kind of love from you again.